So the latest election year quick fix has now come out from Bernie Sanders, everyone's favorite millionaire communist. What he did is he copied an idea from 2023 from Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib, everybody's favorite members of Congress. What is it? A 32-hour work week. Well, it's a great way to buy votes, but is it an effective idea? Does it actually make sense? The first question we wanted to ask about that is, if it's such a great idea, so good for the public, so great for business, why aren't businesses doing that already in America? No one's stopping them. But here's another question. Did anyone else ever try it? Did it work or did it fail? Well, these are questions that Bernie Sanders really doesn't want to talk about. He wants the headline so he can get the votes, so he can get the donations, so the Democrats can maintain power. That's what he's really up to. But we wanted to ask a little bit more. We wanted to think about this a little bit more than just a headline. And so we did. Hello, and thank you for joining us. This is No Soundbites Allowed, and I am your host, Michael Voss, the political dragon here in our offices in the Bronx, New York. It is March 15th, a Friday, approximately 3 p.m. in the afternoon, and we wanted to talk about the news from yesterday, the big news, a 32-hour work week. This is a great idea, some will say, that it will transform everything. Again, the wonderful idea of transformation, which doesn't answer the question, transformation into what? But there's certain questions that we think are inherent in this question about a 32-hour work week that we need to address to really consider whether it's viable or not. And we'll do that in just 1 second. But before we get started, I do want to mention, if this is the first time that you're seeing our channel, we want to welcome you and thank you for being part of our audience. We want you to know that every Sunday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we do a live stream with you. We reach out across all the internet to hear your voices in chat and call-ins from anywhere in the world to tell us what you think about the issues that are affecting all of our lives. We do it because we believe in the First Amendment. We believe free speech is a right for everyone, regardless of what your country may think, regardless of whether or not the internet overlords like it. So we hope you'll join us this Sunday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Now, if you're new to the channel, we do long-form political commentary. We like to take more time to look at the issues than the headlines you're often seeing in the mainstream news media. In this case, we have the headline, as you can see from The Guardian, Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders introduces a 4-day work week bill. Independent lawmaker, independent, key words there, lawmaker says it's time for workers to have better quality of life with a 32-hour work week without loss of pay. So let's stop there. The Guardian is being very generous here because Bernie Sanders isn't an independent, he's a socialist. This is something he's admitted to many times on his own. He is a socialist communist. He is not a Democrat, he is not a Republican, but he is part of the Democratic Party. He runs on the Democrat ticket. He is a Democrat. You may call him an independent because he says he's a socialist, but he gets his money, he gets his support, and he runs on the Democratic line. He's a Democrat. That's just as simple as it gets. So already we can see The Guardian and many of the news media are giving a certain flavor to this to try and shift the way the public looks at this. Because if you knew that a socialist is trying to reduce the amount of work that is being done by the United States, you might say, is that a good thing? Are they doing this because they want America less capable than other nations around the world? Which is a legitimate question. But let's go a little bit further. So Bernie Sanders says that Americans should work somewhere around 32 hours a week because the 40-hour work week is an old idea. Let's debunk that first question right off the bat. Just because it's an old idea doesn't mean it isn't a good idea. Just because it's old or traditional doesn't mean it's not valid or the most efficient way of doing something. That's just a fact. You know what? Math was the older style of teaching math got us to the moon. It wasn't invalid. It isn't without its use, no matter what Common Core may say today. That's just a fact. But I think it's also very important to understand that what Bernie Sanders is offering is a rehash. It's an old idea. This has already been done. This was an idea that was put forward by Democrats, in particular socialist Democrats, like Jamal Bowman, like Rashida Tlaib, like Ilhan Omar, like Pramila Javapaya. These are progressives that are putting this forward. Progressives who are socialist light. This is their idea from 2023 that no one, Democrats, did not support. Democrats didn't support this. Republicans didn't support this. It moved nowhere because it's not a good idea. At least that's what the Democrats in Congress believe. But again, this is an exact copy of the bill. The text isn't up yet, but you'll see the only difference between what was offered in the House in 2023 and what's being offered in the Senate in 2024 is the timing. The timing is something we have to keep in mind. This is an election year, and Joe Biden is doing poorly. According to Real Clear Politics, President Trump is beating Joe Biden by 1.7 points on average. If you look at the polls over and over again, you see that the overwhelming majority say that Trump will win, and usually by at least 2 points, sometimes as high as 6. So Democrats are running scared. They're afraid they're going to lose the 2024 election. And to get Democrats who are not interested in voting for Joe Biden, to get them interested, to get them to show up, they're pushing the issues of race, abortion, and free stuff, waving away college students' debt, and doing things like trying to reduce the work week. Now, there was a full hearing about this, and we do advise you to check it out for yourself. The link is in the description for everything that we're putting on the screen, so you can hear this for yourself, to hear the arguments for and against. But some of the things we think are kind of interesting to point out. Bernie Sanders likes to point to a couple of his go-to countries whenever he's putting out a more socialist, more progressive, more communist idea. He likes to point to France and says, well, France has a 35-hour work week, and they're doing fantastic. Well, they're not the only ones, and they're considering going to a 4-day work week, 32 hours. But let's remember, France has consistent, almost non-stop protests every month. The nation shuts down on a regular basis, not just because of vacations, but just because they shut down of workers who are upset. So the 35-hour work week and theoretically the 32-hour work week is not going to make workers happier. It sounds like a great idea, and this is being promoted by Bernie Sanders and Boston College and some unions, but the fact is, when we look at nations that have had this reduction in work hours, they're no happier working at the job. If you have a job you don't like, it doesn't matter how long you're there, you don't like it. And we see that around the world. So his argument is kind of weak in that part. He also ignores that there are countries that have tried this idea to go to a 32-hour work week, like Japan. And Japan gave up because it didn't work. And this came out in the testimony in the Senate, but it is a fact that when this experiment was done on a national level in a highly competitive capitalist society, it failed. Productivity went down 20% long term. It didn't help anyone. And even if we look at countries like Germany, which is in Europe, which is more progressive than the United States, workers tend to work 36 to 40 hours. Businesses go for what works for them. What is the most advantageous idea for them? To give their workers 40 hours or 36 hours? Well, pretty much in line with the United States and what businesses are capable of doing on their own right now. That brings up a really interesting question that I think is essential to this entire argument. If a 32-hour work week was so beneficial, as Bernie Sanders, as professors from Boston College, as the unions are saying, if it's such an ideal that it increases productivity and it makes workers happy, even on the short term, then why aren't more businesses doing that? There's nothing that prevents any business owner, any business model from having a shorter work week. And they could very much do that if they really wanted to. The fact is, there's no incentive to do that because we have seen over and over again, it's not very effective. In fact, we have seen that many companies, especially those that are more technological, they're bloated. Think of the example what we see when we look at Twitter, or X, if you want to call it that. What happened there? 80% of their workforce was fired. 6,000 people. At the same time that Google, Amazon, Microsoft, Meta were all cutting tens of thousands of employees because they had more employees than they needed. They had waste. The operations at Twitter today are exactly the same as they were when they had 4 times as many employees, but they'd have less costs. The operations at Google, at Amazon, at Microsoft, at Meta, you're not getting your packages delivered any less frequently. You have no less access to the internet because they have fewer workers. They just cut the cost. So the argument that you'll be more efficient by having less work days isn't really true, even in technology companies, where they have too many workers doing too little work. Their productivity is bloated to start with. So the problem isn't how many days people are working, it's what are they doing in the time that they are there. Now, going back to Bernie Sanders and his argument, where he says, the United States, we've been so productive, we're the best in the world, so we can afford to do this. In fact, it would make things better. Now, keep in mind, China doesn't have a 32-hour work week. Not even close. They have sweatshops. Japan, Germany, India, the United Kingdom, none of them have a 32-hour work week. Yes, there is France, which is 7th in the world, but that's 1/10 the productivity, the GDP, that the United States makes. Perhaps they could be higher if they had a longer work week, if they could be more competitive. Also, I want to point out, as Bernie Sanders does, he points to countries like the Netherlands. He points to Sweden and Norway and Belgium. We're talking about countries that have populations the size of New York City, that have the same kind of GDP as New York City, a single city in the United States out of 330 million people. So their countries are as productive as New York City is, with the same kind of budget, the same kind of GDP. It's not fair to take a city and compare it to a nation. That's never been accurate. It's never been a fair outlook. And that's not even counting the cultural differences between the very homogeneous nations of Netherlands, Sweden, Norway, and Belgium to the multicultural melting pot of the United States. So there's certain inherent problems that he's bringing up. And even with this 35-hour work week, France is not immune from the pressures of inflation. Even though Bernie Sanders wants you to think France is doing so much better, their inflation is exactly the same as what has happened here in the United States. The global recession affects France just as much as the United States. The pressures of a more progressive government are having the same result as they're having here in the United States. So working less doesn't make your nation better or worse than any other nation. Again, it's about the end product. It's about what you actually have made, whether you've been efficient and effective. It's about everything except the number of days that you actually put in to get the work. In fact, when we look at nations with the lowest weekly working hours per person across the world, well, the nations that tend to have the least work are nations no one wants to live in. You're talking about Micronesia, Rwanda, Malawi, Somalia. Do you want to live in any of those nations? Is the quality of life in these nations, which have 20, 30 hours of work hours, do you want to have that quality of life? Or would you prefer the quality of life in the United States? There is a massive difference. We're talking about third world nations and the leading first world nation. There is a chasm of difference there. Of course, the Netherlands is up in the higher levels here, as we can see, with about 31 hours. But again, the Netherlands is a city, not comparable to the United States, China, Japan, the United Kingdom. It's just not comparable. So returning to the argument being posed by Bernie Sanders, if we reduce the amount of hours but keep the same amount of pay for the worker, so if you make $1,000 in a week, you'll still make $1,000 even though you're working 25% less. Now, besides the question of if this was such a great idea, why not do it? Again, businesses would love to work less and make the same or more. Everyone would. No one would not take that idea. But it doesn't seem to work. If you have to make 10 widgets in a week, you still have to make 10 widgets. You have less time to make it, but you still have the same target if that's what's necessary for the business to run and for you to get paid. So you have to work harder in less time. That increases the amount of stress, not decreases it. But Bernie Sanders blows past that. He ignores that argument because it doesn't help his position. Fair enough, I guess. And he has several experts that joined him in this discussion, including the UAW president, Shawn Fain. Now, Shawn Fain is someone who sits behind a desk talking about the efforts of the union behind a 32-hour work week. This is nothing but a marketing gimmick, quite honestly. If you knew that you could join a union, get paid better than average, and work less work hours, you would join the union. Because why not? That's the incentive. That's the candy. What he wants is more people in the union paying more union dues, which would make him more money. As a matter of fact, he's making $186,000 a year to sit on his butt behind a desk. He's not actually producing what the other union workers are. And he's making more money than the union workers. He's making $90 an hour. The average union worker makes about $30. The average UAW worker makes between $14 and $31 a year. You're talking somewhere between $60,000 and $260,000 if you're looking at the management. But the average worker is making closer to $31. Again, Shawn, the president, is making 6 times as much. As he complains during the hearing about workers, about CEOs making 6 times as much as the workers. He's doing the same thing. So it's pot calling the kettle black on that one. And then there's Juliet Shore. She's with Boston College. And she's talking about how wonderful this idea is. She also had to mention that she works for an NGO, a non-governmental organization, and they were paying her to say that a 32-hour work week was a good idea. So she has a built-in bias because the people paying her actually support the idea. So the results, she gave them the results they paid for her to get. At least that's what it seems like to me. You can have your own opinion about that. But let's remember that just like the union president, she too makes at least $131,000 at Boston College. So she's making about 6 times as much as the average person in America for sitting on her butt, for teaching a class. She doesn't produce anything, and she has a very unique position as part of academia, the same academia that is indoctrinating many students to support genocide and to support organizations like Hamas that killed Americans and have Americans hostage, tortured as we speak. That's the institution she comes from. That's the ideology they tend to support. So again, there's a big question about her credibility. In fact, there was a YouGov poll today. At the time I took it, 173 other individuals took the same poll. The first question is about the 40-hour work week in America. Is it okay? Is that just about right? The answer is 64% of people who took the poll at the time I did said yes, that's about right. Only 31%, one-third, said no, that's too much work. Those that would support or oppose the 32-hour work week are about even, with a little bit more people saying no, because they probably thought about this more than just the feel-good slogan, the feel-good headline, and actually thought about what would it mean. More work, less time, same job, same pressure. Again, when people are thinking about, would this help efficiency? Would this make America a better country? It's almost tied. 39% said there would be an increase. 37% said it would be a decrease in productivity in the United States, with 22% saying it would make no difference whatsoever. So there's no consensus saying that this is a good idea amongst average Americans. There isn't even a consensus in the people who took the poll that think that there would be a better work life. Only 50% said they think that it might lead to a better work life, a better quality of life than what we have right now. 44% said no, it wouldn't. So that's not a strong feeling in support of this 32-hour work week or the arguments being presented by Ilhan Omar and Jamal Bowman, the progressives, and, of course, the socialist Bernie Sanders. And we have to think about, what are people working for? 79% of the people who took the poll when I did said that salary, that's the reason why they work, to get paid. 47% said they wanted the perks, where they get a company car or health care or some other perk from the job, which isn't a requirement of any business. A sense of personal accomplishment. Now, this is something that I think we've been seeing diminish generation after generation, as we have seen more and more people told that they should be more in technology than actually working with their hands. But 42% currently taking the poll said that a sense of accomplishment is part of why they work. But perhaps one of the things that gives away how important this is to the election is the last question. Do you agree or disagree that young people nowadays are not as hardworking as previous generations? 65%, including myself, taking the poll when I did, said they agree with that statement. 30% disagree. I would be very surprised if that 30% aren't the younger workforce responding to this poll. This is being sold as an idea to the youth, to the next generation of workers, to join a union, to work less, and to get the same or more than what their contemporaries, what their peers and parents have been receiving. To be honest, I've looked at this from several different directions, and I don't see the benefit. I don't see where this works. There is nothing preventing businesses from doing this right now. If your business could work 30 hours a week and make the same money as 40 hours a week, why would you take on the extra expense of having an extra 10 hours of work? Why would you pay for the electricity? Why would you pay for the workers? Why would you pay for anything more than what you need? It just doesn't make business sense. And the businesses that can have more flexible hours, they're doing it. It's just not the majority. So I don't see this as being a good idea. And many of these concerns were brought up by Liberty Vivert from Washington University Business School, who looked at the data internationally, long term, to come up with many of the same things that I was able to guess at just by thinking about this for about 30 seconds. That long term, if you're not happy with your job, you're still not going to be happy even if you work less. Productivity doesn't necessarily go up for any competitive nation in the world. That cost will increase. It will actually hurt people. I believe she said,
cutting out, as they say, extraneous meetings, coffee breaks, having more independent work, going to Zoom. However, over 70% of the U.S. job economy is people working with their hands. They don't necessarily have extraneous meetings or too many coffee breaks to cut out. So statistically, you can't apply this type of cutting of hours across the entire economy. Also, given the types of companies that are potentially capable of cutting their work week, we could see a divide of the rich getting richer, having more time, and the poor needing to take on 3 part-time jobs in order to pay the bills.
I thought it's very interesting as she pointed out something that was ignored by Bernie Sanders and his supporters was the idea that governments are supplementing this, that in each of the experiments, these are social experiments, these social experiments are being supported by the government itself, as example in Spain, where the government is funding, they're supplementing these businesses in being able to run this experiment. Very much like the UBI, Universal Basic Income experiment in Kenya. That is being funded by the World Economic Forum. And if you take away that money and actually put it onto Kenya itself, they wouldn't be able to afford to do it.
Japan tried it, as Dr. Cassidy said, from 1988 to 1996, and the result was not ambiguous. Economic output fell by 20%. In Spain, where there's a pilot program, the companies that participate get access to a multi-million-dollar government fund in order to participate.
So when you ask questions beyond the headline, when you think about the issue compared to the real world, when you look at examples across the world, studies long-term across the world, the 32-hour work week turns out to be a gimmick that's being done in an election year where Democrats and progressives are losing consistently. There is fear. And the best way to combat that fear of loss, the loss of the power of progressives and Democrats, is to try and buy votes. And that's what I think this is, an attempt to buy votes. To say, if Democrats were in power, you would work less, but they won't tell you, well, it'll cost you more, and that you'll have to work harder. They leave that out. They leave out the fact that yeah, the rich people may go on 3-day vacations, but you'll probably have to get an extra job in that meantime just to keep up with the higher inflation this will create. This is a gimmick. It's meant to buy votes. And the socialist, Bernie Sanders, doesn't care. He doesn't want America to be capitalist. He doesn't want you to have everything you have. Yes, he has 3 houses. Yes, he's a multimillionaire as a socialist. Yes, he does not donate his money to the government, but he wants you to pay for everything that he feels should be happening. When you really think about it, this is a horrible idea, at least the way it's being presented right now. But what do you think? We look forward to hearing your voice about this and other issues every Sunday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I hope that you're going to have a great day. I thank you for taking time to see this video.
No Soundbites Allowed is a podcast hosted by Michael Vass. The podcast focuses on providing in-depth discussions on various political and social issues. As the title suggests, the aim is to go beyond quick sound bites and explore topics in greater detail. Michael Vass, the host, engages with guests to analyze and discuss current events, policies, and political ideologies. The live stream and videos cover a wide range of subjects, including politics, economics, social issues, and more. By delving into longer, more comprehensive conversations, No Soundbites Allowed aims to provide listeners with a deeper understanding of the complexities surrounding contemporary issues. AI is listening. Shouldn't you know what AI knows? Aren't you tired of being treated like a child by major media parrots and want to be respected as an adult? There is nothing to lose and a lot to potentially gain, so check out No Soundbites Allowed on all major social media platforms.